Hey, this is Ben King. This is The Art of Peace, stanza 9 of 114. So I'm going to come into presence by noticing the sensation of the tree I'm leaning against. So right now I can feel the most sensation by my right shoulder blade, in between my right shoulder blade and my spine. And if I shift a little bit, I can feel how the bark of the tree is very rough and protrusive. The bark that sticks out, and there's deep crevices in between the bark. It's an evergreen tree. It's a robust tree. It's different than a smooth tree in context of sensation. If I shift around a little bit, I can create a variance of sensation, and creating a variance of sensation helps me recognize more sensation. Now, while I've been here, I've noticed that my body weight is resting on top of the pine needles that this tree sheds, and it reminds me of Fort Bragg. The pine needles covered Fort Bragg in the woods, land nav. So anyway, my cold weather pants sitting on top of these pine needles I'm sliding a little bit. My back's leaning against the tree, but my body weight is sliding away from the tree on the pine needles themselves. My body weight runs into itself at my ground, at my feet. So my feet are solid against the ground in a cross-legged position underneath me. I know that because I feel it. I feel an increased pressurization, to use a word. You got to use a word in the context of how we communicate presently. Language, digital media, the like. Anyway, I feel the pressure. I feel more pressure on my right. The pressure is localized beneath the right ankle. I feel the body weight of my left knee, left shin, outside left knee, left shin, on top of the inside of my right foot. It fits into the arch pretty nice. Now on my left foot, right knee, that connection, I can feel the way my left foot is more pressurized towards the big toe mound, whereas my right foot's more pressurized toward the heel. So big toe mound is where the connection is on top, and the connection below to the earth is the pinky toe, the knuckle of the pinky toe, and some of the top of my foot. Now I'm just going to pause for a moment here and notice the cold. It's cold out. The cold wind feels like it takes some of my energy with it. Like it's pulling at me, forcing my body to generate more heat to complement it. Anyway, come back into the body. I'm going to come into my pelvis, and I recognize if I send my tailbone backwards into the pine needles, I start to feel a little bit more pressurization, a little bit more ground. That ground becomes more reliable. As that ground becomes more reliable, I can actually, by not pulling in my guts, but sending my guts out, sending my guts forward, I can use my ground beneath my torso I can use my ground beneath my core as something to pull the rest of my body forward. So now I'm no longer sitting against a tree. I've used my ground to pull my body forward. It's the same way an artillery piece uses its ground to fire a round. It has to be grounded, it has to be connected, or else the energy would just bounce away. It can't be directed. That's why grounding is important. It gives you the ability to direct. Now I'm going to direct my awareness into my core in order to detect any variations of efficiency in the form of sensation. If there's a sensation that's too powerful in the front, I want to soften that and create balance in the back. If I'm too pressurized right, I want to figure out a way to soften that pressurization and come back to a more centered, a more zero. Zero just means where you begin. Now, heart space. I lose a lot of energy from my shoulder blades. So I like to soften my shoulder blades by thinking my elbows are getting heavy. Then doing something with my hands, putting my hands in a conscious position. So it's cold out, so I'm going to bring my hands into my clothing, create a flower fist. So a flower fist is the closing of the hands, but not completely into a fist. It's the same movement as a fist, but instead you're holding the fist like you would an open flower. So I'm going to create just the right amount of energy at my hands so that I'm not squeezing my hands, nor am I letting my hands fall open to release the wind back into my sleeves. And once I've interacted with that, I'm going to go to the top of my shoulder blades. Now, once I'm at the top of my shoulder blades, I'm going to go forward in my body to the collarbones, the two heads of the collarbones right at the base of the neck. Now I'm going to drop my chin into that because that's just what feels good. It feels nice to just drop my chin. And also, my first image was that of little kids. I see lots of little kids dropping or spending time with a really long spine, and part of that long spine has the chin down. And as I do that, it feels nice for me. I feel lengthening in my back. I feel movement all the way down to my pelvis. Kind of makes me want to shift around a little bit, kind of exacerbate. It's kind of like a super clear pool of water reflects, and you can almost get lost in the reflection. And you throw a pebble into that reflection and it creates ripples. The reflection doesn't disappear, but it takes on a new tempo for a moment, something very recognizable. And you maybe notice things you didn't notice before, but at least your curiosity is tapped. Now, top of my head, what's going on in my head? Is it a sensational experience or a idea experience? Am I in my ideas? Now just a full breath in. I imagine my breath is the tiniest of sparks growing exponentially in a spherical fashion. So it's a sphere starting out as a dot, expanding in every direction to a huge sphere, and then that huge direction turns back into the small dot. All the way at the top is a huge sphere. It's being grounded by my body beneath it. And then as I exhale, I'm going to come back down to the dot. And I'm visualizing this in my mind. My nerves are responding to this because my body is the density of my mind. So as I'm picturing this tiny dot and I'm allowing my breath to leave, at some point for me, it's going to feel like there's absolutely no breath. There's no space. It's all compressed as tiny as it could be. And from there, expand out of that. Now I'm at the beginning. Go any direction from here. It's just kind of a reset. Use the language we used on the first day. The first thing I did was tame the mind through sensation of anything. I used the tree behind me, brought my mind into more present tense awareness. And then I trained my mind to recognize what's going on in my body. Typically, for the novice, we go through the body from the ground up in chunks: feet, pelvis, core, heart space, throat, top of the head, and then the breathing. As you advance, as you get better at that, you no longer need that particular path in. You can just kind of fall in. And once you fall in and you start looking at all the experiences that you have non-judgmentally, you can begin to interact with the experiences just as they are without wanting them to be a particular way or the other. And from that awareness, you just follow along. If it's super, super big and you don't want it to be super, super big, interact with it and make it small. If it's super, super small and you don't want it to be super, super small, interact with it and make it big. And you are the choice that moves in between that bifurcation. Now, time spent in this space has to include awareness of thoughts. So that's the headspace, the breath. That's the headspace. It has a sensational element and it has a thought element. And then you move along, interacting. It's time spent in non-judgmental present tense awareness. Biologically speaking, without an idea, your body is spending time in healing zone, recovery zone, rebirth zone. Rebirth zone. You could think of the sympathetic nervous system as the change zone. Parasympathetic is the rebirth zone. In yoga, Kali represents that, the space between that. She's vicious. She's black toned and red tongued, and her skirt is of human skulls with their tongues dangling out, eyes spun back, skin slack. And she's just loving it. She is a vicious monster. She's the space in between. In yogic mythology, she represents that moment between death and rebirth, death and rebirth, death and rebirth. And the only thing that calms her down is when she becomes grounded on top of Shiva. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. It's a mantra. Many people have said it for a long time as a sign of respect to Shiva, the creator. Om Namah Shivaya. Now it's interesting to interact with that idea, but the experience of this is time spent out of my typical language. Om Namah Shivaya is not my typical language. My mind is piqued by this. So I'm spending time out of non-judgmental present tense awareness. In particular, I'm spending time in, ideally, curiosity, interest. So I'm not in my experience of my identity, my responsibilities, my typical flow. I am in brand new space. Time spent in brand new space allows for creativity and insight and inspiration, change forward, evolve. Renew, re-energized, to move back into life, to interact with life as though life and curiosity are just different awarenesses. You get to choose. Sometimes you got a whole week. You can take a whole week and spend time in these places. Or maybe you only got 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Either way, it's the same thing. You're turning on this different aspect of your being. You're choosing to turn on a different aspect of your being. You're making that choice. And that's part of the practice. That's why you tame your mind. That's why you retrain your mind. To recognize the choices you have. The 9th stanza of the Art of Peace. Now and again, it is necessary to seclude yourself among deep mountains and hidden valleys to restore your link to the source of life. Breathe in and let yourself soar to the ends of the universe. Breathe out and bring the cosmos back inside. Next, breathe up all fecundity and vibrancy of the earth. Finally, blend the breath of heaven and the breath of earth with your own, becoming the breath of life itself.